Sometimes life feels like it's conspiring against you. People speak with sharp tongues, not always out of truth, but often from their own pain. And you stand there absorbing every syllable like a sponge soaked in judgment. Situations spin so fast that you can't find your footing. And just when you think you found a moment of rest, the chaos returns like a tide that never recedes. You try to hold it together. You try to be calm, to be unaffected, but the world keeps pressing your limits like fingers pushing into a bruise. You start to wonder, how do you survive this constant pressure without breaking? How do you keep your center when the whole world seems determined to push you off balance? The truth is, you don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to armor up and retaliate every time someone hurls a word your way. There's another path, a quieter, more powerful one. One where you don't just survive life's storms. You become the stillness in their center. A calm, unshakable force rooted so deeply that nothing outside can pull you apart. And that path, though ancient, is timeless. It's woven through the teachings of mindfulness, wisdom, and emotional freedom. And it begins not with fighting what is, but with shifting how you see it. When someone insults you, it's easy to let the sting take over, to internalize their judgment and let it echo in your mind for days, maybe weeks. But what if instead you paused? What if instead of reacting, you asked yourself, what does this moment teach me? Not in a way that blames you, but in a way that empowers you. Every insult can become a mirror, not of who you are, but of what you still hold on to. Maybe it's pride, maybe it's a wound that still hasn't healed, or maybe it's simply an opportunity to stay rooted in compassion when it would be easier to flare up in anger. Not every arrow aimed at you needs to hit. You can let them pass through the space you've created between stimulus and response. That space is your peace. That space is where your power lives. And the more you nurture it, the more you'll realize that people's words say more about them than they do about you. Their projection is not your truth. Their anger is not your burden. In those moments, remind yourself gently, I am not the words others choose. I am the stillness that watches them rise and fall. You learn to stop handing over the reins of your emotional world to others. You no longer let someone's bad day become your bad day. You stop letting their criticism become your identity. That doesn't mean you stop feeling. It means you start choosing what you allow in. Your emotions are sacred territory. You get to decide who enters. And you do so with discernment, not walls, but clear boundaries. You begin to hold yourself to high standards, not because you crave perfection, but because you recognize your own potential. You push yourself to be honest, to be kind, to grow. And at the same time, you learn to offer others the grace you wish someone had given you on your worst day. You stop expecting everyone to match your pace, your clarity, your choices. They are on their own path. Let them walk it. And when someone stumbles in front of you, when their humanity spills out in impatience or anger, you don't always have to correct or confront. Sometimes you just breathe. You choose peace. You offer understanding, not because you excuse their behavior, but because you value your serenity more than being right. Every encounter, even the unpleasant ones, becomes a classroom. Everyone becomes a teacher. The rude cashier, the inattentive friend, the aggressive driver. Each one gives you a chance to respond differently, to practice the values you claim to believe in. You become a student of life in the most ordinary moments. And in doing so, you gain a kind of wisdom that books can't teach. You start to notice the fleeting nature of emotion. Anger feels big when it arrives, but it fades if you don't feed it. Sadness rises, then softens. Even joy, if clung to too tightly, begins to slip. So you stop gripping. You let it all flow. You become the observer of emotion, not its captive. And in that observing, you gain freedom. Emotional freedom, the kind where your peace is no longer tethered to how the world treats you. The kind where someone can insult you and you meet it with silence. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of power. That's when you begin to feel invincible. Not because nothing hurts, but because nothing controls you anymore. You still feel. You still care. But your center remains untouched. Your peace no longer gets dragged into every storm. You become like the deep ocean. Surface waves may churn, but the depths remain still. And as you move through life with this newfound stillness, you begin to understand acceptance. Real acceptance, not the kind that says, "It is what it is," while simmering in resentment, but the kind that breathes through change, that bows gently to what cannot be controlled. You stop trying to force outcomes. You stop resisting reality. And in that surrender, something miraculous happens. Peace enters. Acceptance doesn't mean giving up. It means redirecting your energy from resistance to presence. You use your strength not to fight what is, but to shape what can be. You learn to stay present with what hurts, not because you enjoy the pain, but because you trust the process. You trust that even the most uncomfortable moments carry wisdom. And through this trust, detachment is born. You stop attaching your joy to how people treat you. You stop attaching your identity to titles, relationships, possessions. You love deeply. You care fully, but you don't cling. You hold everything with open hands, knowing that nothing outside you can complete you. You are already whole. You become someone who walks through fire and doesn't burn. Not because the fire is gone, but because you've become fireproof. From within, there's a moment in your growth where silence begins to speak louder than reaction. It doesn't mean you don't care anymore. It means you've learned the value of your peace. And not everything deserves a piece of that peace. You've seen what happens when you react to every trigger, every insult, every inconvenience. It drains you. It scatters your energy. It keeps you stuck in cycles of reactivity, constantly handing your power over to things outside of you. But now you found another way. The way of grounded awareness. The path where you observe before responding, where you feel without being consumed, where you hold your emotions like a sacred guest, but you don't let them rule your home. It takes time to learn that kind of strength. The strength that doesn't shout, doesn't prove, doesn't retaliate. It just stands, quietly, unshaken. There's a soft power in that, a power that doesn't depend on dominance, but on clarity, a power that can look chaos in the face and not be moved by it. Not because it denies what's happening, but because it knows that peace isn't found in changing what's outside, it's found in staying rooted within. You begin to choose where your energy flows more carefully now. You don't engage with every disagreement. You don't argue with people who aren't ready to understand. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. Not because you're passive, but because you're wise. Because you've learned that your energy is a currency, and not every situation deserves your investment. You save your presence for places that welcome it. You share your heart with people who hold it with care. And when you meet hostility, you don't mirror it. You transcend it. Not out of pride, but out of purpose. Because you're no longer interested in being right, you're interested in being free. And freedom looks like many things. Sometimes it's walking away without bitterness. Sometimes it's staying with yourself when the world turns cold. Sometimes it's choosing forgiveness, not because the other person asked for it, but because your soul can't afford to carry the weight of resentment any longer. You learn to forgive, not because the past was okay, but because you're ready to reclaim your peace. You understand now that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting someone else to suffer. So you let it go, not all at once, maybe not completely, but moment by moment, breath by breath, You release your grip. You loosen the knot in your chest. You stop revisiting what cannot be changed, and you start rewriting what can. And that rewriting begins with your thoughts. You pay closer attention to the stories you tell yourself. The ones that say you're not enough. The ones that repeat old criticisms from voices long gone. The ones that keep you playing small, hiding your brilliance, dimming your joy. You hear those stories now, but you don't believe them anymore. You question them. You challenge them. You write new ones. Stories that say you are healing, you are growing, you are learning how to be gentle with yourself, even on the days when the world is not. And that gentleness, it becomes your compass. You stop pushing yourself to the brink to prove your worth. You rest without guilt. You say no without apology. You create boundaries not to punish others, but to honor yourself. You become the protector of your own peace, the guardian of your own energy, and you stop outsourcing your self-worth. You don't need someone to choose you to feel chosen. You don't need constant reassurance to feel secure. You've started choosing yourself in ways you never did before. Choosing your needs, your voice, your well-being, your truth. That truth begins to guide you, not the truth others expect from you, not the version of you that was easy to digest or nice to be around, but the real you, the one that exists beneath the people-pleasing, beneath the masks, beneath the conditioning, the truth that rises like a tide, unstoppable and honest. You let that truth move through your life like water carving stone, slowly, gently, but permanently. And in living your truth, you stop fearing solitude. Silence is no longer threatening. It's nourishing. You find refuge in your own company. You start to enjoy being with yourself, not in a performative way, not because you've escaped pain, but because you've made peace with who you are. You're no longer running from your shadow, and you're sitting beside it. You're saying, I see you. You belong here too. You understand now that healing doesn't mean becoming a version of yourself that never feels pain. It means becoming someone who holds pain with compassion, who doesn't abandon themselves when it gets hard, who stays with the trembling, who whispers, even now I love you. That kind of love, it rewires you. It seeps into your habits, your language, your self-talk. You stop attacking yourself in moments of failure. You stop repeating the words of your worst critics. You begin to speak to yourself like someone who matters. And that inner dialogue, it changes the entire tone of your life. You begin to feel safe in your own presence, safe in your own skin, safe in your own breath. And from that safety, you start to create, not from pressure, not from comparison, but from overflow, from inspiration, from the joy of expression. You don't need it to be perfect. You just need it to be real. And that realness, it ripples. It shows up in your relationships too. You stop performing. You stop bending. You stop minimizing your needs to make others comfortable. You show up fully. You speak your truth kindly, clearly, unapologetically. And those who resonate with your truth, they stay, they rise, they match your energy. And those who don't, they fall away without force, without bitterness. Just a quiet letting go, a sacred release. Because you're not clinging anymore. You're not trying to make things fit that don't belong. You've made peace with the impermanence of things. You understand now that everything that leaves creates space for something more aligned. You've stopped resisting endings. You meet them with open hands. And in those open hands, new beginnings arrive. Not loud, not rushed, but steady, aligned, true. The more you evolve, the more you begin to redefine strength. You used to think it meant pushing through everything, holding back tears, showing no signs of weakness. But now you understand. True strength is soft. It allows the breaking. It allows the silence. It allows the truth to be spoken, even when your voice shakes. because there's a kind of power that doesn't need to defend itself, a power that knows it loses nothing by being vulnerable. So you lean into that vulnerability, not to be pitied, not to be saved, but because it's how you heal. You no longer hide your wounds out of shame. You trace them gently with understanding. Each scar has its own story, and you've stopped trying to edit them out. You've come to realize that your story, with all its pain and all its beauty, is still sacred. And every chapter, even the hardest ones, belongs. You let go of perfection, not because you've lowered your standards, but because you've raised your understanding. Perfection never made you whole. It only made you tired. It only made you wear a mask that slowly suffocated your joy. But now you choose presence over performance. You show up messy if that's how life is. You let the moment be enough. You let yourself be enough. And as that grace sinks in, you notice a shift in how you relate to others. You stop needing them to be perfect too. You offer space for their growth. You allow room for missteps, just as you've allowed them for yourself. Your relationships become less about control and more about connection. Less about expectation, more about understanding. You listen with your heart now. You don't just wait for your turn to speak. You don't listen to reply. You listen to feel. And in that kind of listening, healing begins. Because we're all carrying stories. We're all holding unseen battles behind tired smiles. And when you truly see another person, not for who they present themselves to be, but for who they are beneath the layers, that's where empathy lives. That's where compassion begins to soften the hardest places inside you. You become less interested in judgment and more curious about truth. You ask questions not to criticize, but to understand. You speak not to impress, but to connect. And when people don't meet you there, you don't shrink, you don't chase. You simply acknowledge with peace that not everyone is meant to walk this part of the path with you. And that's okay. You've stopped making someone's absence mean something about your worth. You've stopped measuring your value through someone else's capacity to see it. You know your worth now, not as a concept, but as a lived experience. It shows in the way you hold your head, in the way you say no without guilt, in the way you don't over-explain, over-apologize, or overcompensate. You exist with quiet certainty, not arrogance, just truth, just the soft, grounded awareness that who you are is not up for debate. And this truth becomes your foundation. It becomes the ground beneath you when things fall apart. Because life still brings pain, it still tests you, it still throws shadows across your path. But now you move differently. You don't panic, you don't collapse, you pause, you breathe. You remember who you are, and then you choose the most loving response you can, even if that means choosing silence, space, or solitude. You've learned that peace is not passive, it's an active choice. Sometimes peace looks like walking away from what disturbs your soul. Sometimes it looks like turning down an opportunity that doesn't align. Sometimes it looks like staying silent when someone is trying to bait you into a war you don't need to fight. Peace, you've learned, is not a luxury, it's your responsibility. And with that responsibility comes a kind of sacred self-leadership. You stop waiting for someone to save you, validate you, fix you. You stop outsourcing your healing. You realize the path is yours. The work is yours. The freedom you long for, it begins with your own willingness to meet yourself in the mirror every day and ask, how can I be more kind, more honest, more whole? You start living with intention. You don't rush your mornings anymore. You wake up and take a moment to check in, not with your to-do list, but with your breath. You ask, what does my soul need today? And sometimes the answer is movement. Sometimes it's stillness. Sometimes it's crying in the shower. Sometimes it's watching the sun rise with a warm cup in your hands. You follow that answer without judgment. You let your day unfold from presence, not pressure. You begin to notice beauty again, not in grand gestures, but in small things. The way sunlight dances on the floor, the way laughter bubbles up unexpectedly, the way your body keeps showing up for you, breath after breath. You no longer need life to be extraordinary to feel gratitude. You've learned to find meaning in the mundane, and that changes everything. You become more anchored in the now, less pulled by the past, less anxious about the future. You stop rehearsing conversations that never happen. You stop rewriting the endings of stories already closed. You begin to live here, in this breath, this step, this heartbeat. And in doing so, you finally come home, not to a place, to yourself. There's a quiet power in becoming your own sanctuary, not the kind built from stone or safety nets, but from presence, from patience, from the soft return to yourself each time the world pulls you away. You used to run from silence, didn't you? Filling every space with noise, distraction, something to numb the discomfort. But now you sit with the ache, with the breath, with the stillness. Not because you figured it all out, but because you've stopped abandoning yourself when you don't have the answers. You've begun to trust that the answers are not always meant to arrive on your timeline. Some clarity only comes after surrender, after the resistance softens, after you stop trying to wrestle life into a shape that makes sense. And that surrender, it's not defeat. It's the deepest form of trust. Trust that the current knows where it's going, that your soul knows how to return home, even when your mind forgets the way. You start to release the grip, not just on expectations, but on identities that never belong to you. The achiever, the fixer, the one who always smiles. You begin to notice the roles you've played just to survive, the way you shrank yourself to fit into spaces not built for your truth. And you honor that because survival is sacred. But now you're ready for more than survival. You're ready for liberation. So you unlearn, you unbecome, you unravel, not into nothingness, but into wholeness. And that wholeness doesn't mean polished perfection. It means integration. It means holding all your parts with love, the brave and the broken, the fierce and the fragile. You stop cutting yourself into pieces just to be accepted. You stop hiding the parts of you that don't fit someone else's narrative. You write your own. And it's not always pretty. Growth rarely is. It's messy and raw and full of moments where you question everything. But even in those moments, there's beauty because you're no longer afraid to feel. You're no longer numbing yourself to keep the peace. You're letting the waves crash, knowing you won't drown because you've learned how to anchor within. And that anchor, it's not found in doing more. It's found in being more present, in breathing through the uncertainty, in remembering that no emotion lasts forever, that every storm eventually breaks into light, that your tears, your silence, your sacred unraveling are not signs of weakness. They're signs of courage. The courage to stop pretending, to stop performing, to stop betraying your inner voice just to be loved. And you've stopped chasing love that requires you to disappear. You know now that real love doesn't ask you to become someone else. It sees you fully. It holds your truth like something precious. And until you find that love in others, you give it to yourself, daily, fiercely, gently. You become the kind of partner, friend, parent, guide to yourself that you always long for. You speak to yourself like someone you're learning to trust. You say, "I forgive you," when old patterns show up. You say, "I'm proud of you," when no one else notices your quiet progress. You say, "I'm with you," when everything feels too heavy to carry alone. And that voice, the one that once echoed with criticism, begins to soften. It begins to sound like home, like truth, like love. That's how transformation unfolds. Not through dramatic shifts, but through the subtle way your inner world begins to feel safer, more sacred. You stop fighting with yourself. You stop turning your pain into punishment. You hold it instead. You hold yourself, and slowly that holding becomes healing. You realize that healing was never about returning to who you were before the pain. It's about integrating what the pain revealed. It's about becoming someone new, someone truer, someone who no longer needs to explain their worth because it radiates from the way they live, the way they walk into a room without needing to be seen, the way they offer kindness without needing it returned, the way they stay present even when it hurts. You're not waiting to be chosen anymore. You've chosen yourself. And that choice, it changes everything. It changes what you accept. It changes what you expect. It changes how you breathe in a moment of discomfort and say, even this I can hold. You've stopped being afraid of starting over. You've stopped fearing the unknown because you trust yourself now. You trust that you will not abandon yourself again. And with that trust comes freedom, the freedom to rest, the freedom to grieve, the freedom to laugh without guilt, the freedom to take up space, to say what you mean, to ask for what you need, to say no, to say yes, fully and unapologetically. You are no longer negotiating your wholeness for anyone. And in that decision, your life begins to reshape itself around your truth. Not overnight, not without challenge, but with each breath, each boundary, each brave act of returning to yourself. The world you live in begins to reflect the love you now give to yourself. You don't need to chase peace anymore. You've become it. You notice now how different everything feels when you are no longer at war with yourself. The air feels lighter. Conversations feel more grounded. Even your thoughts begin to slow down. There is no longer a rush to fix or perfect or prove. You are not constantly looking for the next breakthrough, the next goal, the next external validation. You are simply being, breathing, existing with a kind of reverence that says, this moment is enough and so am I. And when moments come that test that peace, and they will, you greet them like an old teacher rather than a threat. You do not panic. You do not spiral. You take a breath and say, what are you here to show me? Not from a place of victimhood, but from awareness. You have stopped seeing life as something that happens to you and started seeing it as something that speaks to you. Each emotion, each challenge, each joy, it all has a message. And now you are listening fully. You notice your triggers, not to shame yourself for them, but to meet them with care. You pause when the old reaction rises. You take space before speaking. You sit with discomfort before making assumptions. You no longer react from the wound. You respond from the awareness of it. That shift, though small in action, is massive in its ripple. Because that's what growth truly is. Not just learning, but choosing. Choosing new patterns. Choosing stillness when chaos calls. Choosing compassion where judgment once lived. Choosing to stay with yourself, even when it would be easier to numb, to run, to fall back into what's familiar. But you've seen what familiar costs. You know now what it's like to ignore your needs, to pretend you're okay when you're not, to silence your truth just to keep the peace. And you're not willing to pay that price anymore. Your peace is too precious. Your energy is too sacred. Your truth is too important. So you begin living in alignment. You say what you mean. You feel what you feel. You no longer sugarcoat your emotions or stretch yourself thin for approval. You've grown tired of being a version of yourself that pleases everyone but fulfills no one, not even you. And so you stop, you pause, you reset. That pause becomes your power. It gives you room to breathe. It gives you space to choose again, to speak differently, to act from love, not fear. You begin to surround yourself with people who nourish your nervous system, not just your ego. People who don't need you to perform, impress, or explain. People who see you, not for what you give, but for who you are. And when you find those people, you hold them close, not in grasping, but in gratitude, because now you know the difference between attachment and connection. You've learned that love doesn't require sacrifice of self. That connection doesn't mean codependency. That closeness doesn't mean collapse. You can love someone deeply without losing yourself in them. You can offer your heart without abandoning your boundaries. And that balance, it's new, but it's necessary. You no longer want relationships that drain you. You no longer stay where your voice feels unwelcome. You no longer shrink just to fit into spaces that weren't built to hold your truth. You're not angry about it. You're just done. Done with proving. Done with performing. Done with patterns that leave you empty. And in that decision, you find something unexpected. Space. Space for real joy. For slow mornings. For honest conversations. For the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for anything in return. You let go of the chase. You stop looking for your worth in places that never knew how to honor it. You come home, to your own body, to your own breath, to the silence that no longer scares you. And from that silence, something beautiful begins to bloom, a gentle joy, unburdened by conditions. A joy that shows up in the way you notice sunlight on your skin, or the softness of your sheets after a long day, or the quiet peace of being alone and not feeling lonely. You start laughing more, not to hide your pain, but because you're healing through it. You cry more too, but now your tears feel holy, cleansing, real. You are no longer ashamed of your tenderness. You wear it like a prayer, and you notice so slowly how much more human you feel. Not polished, not perfect, but real, alive, awake. And from this aliveness, you begin to create again. Not just art or work, but moments. You create peace in your home, safety in your relationships, presence in your everyday routines. You are no longer waiting for a better future to feel alive. You are creating it now, one conscious choice at a time. You're not afraid of starting over, because you know now that starting over doesn't mean you failed. It means you're brave enough to choose yourself again. And you'll keep choosing yourself even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, because now you know the truth. Your life doesn't begin when everything falls into place. It begins the moment you stop betraying yourself to make it look like it already has. There's a turning point you reach when you realize that healing isn't something that ends. It's not a destination with a grand arrival or a final chapter that says, "Now I'm complete." Healing is more like a cycle, a spiral that keeps returning you to parts of yourself you've forgotten, ignored, or pushed aside. But each time you return, you meet those parts with more kindness, more softness, more grace. And that grace, it changes everything. You don't panic when the old pain resurfaces. You don't shame yourself for still being affected by things you thought you'd move past. You breathe, you observe, you welcome it like a visitor. You ask, what are you here to show me now? And the answer is never punishment, it's presence, a deeper level of understanding, a layer you hadn't touched before, a wound ready to be held, not fixed. You've stopped trying to fix everything anyway. That need to constantly improve, to always be doing something, to always be getting somewhere. It's softened. You see now that some days are for movement and some are for stillness. Some moments are for breakthroughs and some are just for being. You've stopped seeing the slower days as setbacks. You've stopped defining progress by how much you accomplish. Because now progress looks different. It looks like resting when you used to push through. It looks like crying when you used to numb. It looks like telling the truth when it would have been easier to stay silent. It looks like letting go of what's not yours to carry. And sometimes it looks like just sitting with yourself in quiet acceptance, whispering, "I'm still here, I'm still trying," and that's enough. You don't owe anyone your timeline. You don't owe the world an explanation for how you move through your own becoming. You owe yourself permission to go at your own pace, to take as long as you need, to not have all the answers. You're no longer performing your healing for others. You're living it, for real. And that living is sacred. You hold yourself differently now. There's a tenderness in your gaze, a calm in your step. You've become someone who values peace over drama, truth over image, connection over convenience. And it's not because life has gotten easier. It's because you've grown deeper, more rooted, more attuned to what actually matters. You know now that peace isn't found in avoiding pain. It's found in how you move through it, how you respond, how you breathe, how you show up for yourself in the middle of it all. You don't chase peace anymore. You cultivate it. You make room for it. In your home, in your relationships, in your inner dialogue. And peace for you doesn't mean everything is quiet. Sometimes it means everything is loud, but you're not lost in the noise. You're anchored, you're centered. You can hear the chaos without becoming it. You can hold the tension without collapsing into it. That's the kind of peace that no one can take from you, because it's not dependent on your circumstances. It's built from within. It's built from the thousands of small decisions you make every day. To choose love over fear, presence over escape, clarity over confusion. To say, "This hurts," instead of pretending you're fine. To rest even when the world tells you to keep going. To protect your joy like it matters, because it does. You're no longer waiting for permission to live fully. You've given it to yourself. And with that permission comes expansion, a softening, a deepening. You start to notice life in all its raw beauty, the way your breath rises and falls, the way laughter cracks through tension, the way light hits the floor at certain hours of the day. You're not rushing past these moments anymore. You're inside them, fully, willingly. You're not trying to escape your life. You're learning how to inhabit it. And in doing so, you realize that the life you used to dream about isn't found in some distant future. It's found here, in the ordinary, in the real, in the way you show up to the present moment with honesty and grace. You let go of chasing big highs. You find meaning in the quiet. You find fulfillment in the simple. A deep breath, a long walk, a genuine conversation. These things, once overlooked, have become sacred. You've simplified, not out of lack, but out of wisdom. You don't need more to feel whole. You just need presence. And now you have that. You've stopped performing joy. You've started feeling it, even when it's fleeting, even when it's tangled with grief. You allow it. You allow everything now. The joy, the sorrow, the questions, the silence. You stop trying to be the healed version of yourself. You just be. And in being, you realize that this soft, steady, imperfect unfolding is the most honest version of peace you've ever known. There's a shift that happens when you stop holding yourself to unrealistic expectations. You stop expecting yourself to be unfazed all the time. You stop pretending to be okay when your soul is aching for rest, for space, for breath. You let yourself be tired. You let yourself feel unsure. You begin to honor your humanness like it's a language worth learning, not a flaw to hide. And in that space of acceptance, your nervous system begins to settle. Not because the world has changed, but because your relationship to yourself has. You are no longer trying to be unbreakable. You are learning to be unshakably kind to yourself, even when you break. You are learning that your softness is not a liability, that your tears are not a weakness, that your vulnerability is not something to be managed, but something to be welcomed. You've spent so long trying to be strong in the way the world told you to be, Now you're redefining that strength. You're writing your own definition, and it sounds a lot like grace. You don't beat yourself up for needing time. You don't criticize your pace. You hold space for the parts of you that are still catching up to the healing. You speak gently to the younger version of you that still flinches at the sound of rejection or the silence of abandonment. You tell them, I'm here now, I won't leave again. And maybe that's what healing really is. Not forgetting the pain, but being the one who stays. Being the one who doesn't run when it gets hard. Being the one who listens when no one else ever did. Being the one who wraps your arms around the shaking child within and whispers, you're safe now. You begin to reparent yourself, not by fixing every wound, but by holding them, by allowing them to be seen, felt, understood. You start recognizing when your reactions are coming from a place of survival rather than truth. And instead of shaming yourself, you meet that with compassion. You say, of course you feel this way. Look at what you've carried. But you're not just carrying it anymore. You're releasing it slowly, gently, intentionally. You're learning that letting go isn't a single act, it's a practice. A choice made again and again to no longer grip what hurts, to no longer define yourself by what happened, to create a new narrative where your pain becomes wisdom. Your wounds become gateways and your story becomes a lantern for others walking through the dark. You begin to trust yourself to hold more, not more pressure, but more truth, more presence, more love. Love that doesn't come with conditions or expectations. Love that doesn't shrink when things get hard. Love that stays. And that love, it begins with you. You give it to yourself on the days when you show up messy, on the days when anxiety clouds your clarity, on the days when your voice trembles. You choose love then, you choose presence then, because now you understand that those are the moments when you need your own love the most. You stop waiting to be healed to offer yourself softness. You start offering it now, and that offering, it becomes a habit. You take breaks without guilt. You breathe deeper without needing to explain why. You stop proving, you start existing, and in that existence, you find freedom. You no longer tie your self-worth to how much you do, how much you earn, how much others praise you. You are worthy because you are here, because you are breathing, because you are trying, and trying in a world that constantly asks you to be more, do more, achieve more. That is radical. That is enough. You stop comparing your journey to others. You stop measuring your timeline against theirs. You remind yourself that your path is sacred, even if no one else understands it, especially then, because you're not walking this path to be understood. You're walking it to be true. You make peace with being misunderstood. You make peace with not having all the answers. You stop needing every piece of your story to make sense. You simply live it, fully, honestly, with as much integrity as you can hold. And that integrity, it keeps you steady, it keeps you close to your values, it keeps you aligned, even when others don't agree. Even when it would be easier to conform, you don't. Not out of rebellion, but out of devotion to your own truth, to your own peace, to your own becoming. You've realized now that the most powerful transformation is not loud. It's quiet. It happens in the small moments. When you choose to respond with calm, when you choose to pause instead of panic, when you choose to listen to your body instead of overriding it, when you choose to say yes to yourself even if it disappoints others. These small moments, they are your revolution. They are the proof that you are not who you once were. You've stopped living on autopilot. You've started living awake. And while it may not always feel graceful, it is deeply real. You've traded certainty for curiosity. You've traded urgency for presence. You've traded performance for peace. And you know what? It's working. Not because everything is perfect, But because you are becoming more you every day, there comes a moment where you stop seeking permission. Permission to rest, permission to speak your truth, permission to take up space in a world that told you to shrink. You realize the only person you've really been waiting for is yourself. And so you begin to give yourself what you've been asking others for your entire life. You stop looking outward for validation. You stop chasing approval like it's the only path to love. You reclaim that authority. You look in the mirror and say, I see you, I honor you, I choose you. That choice, repeated day after day, is where self-respect grows. It's not loud, it's not flashy, but it's solid. It shows up when you decline what doesn't serve you, when you speak up even though your voice shakes, when you no longer tolerate the things you use to apologize for just to keep the peace. You've seen what happens when you betray yourself to be accepted. You've felt the hollowness that comes with pretending, and you've had enough. Enough of bending to be loved, enough of shrinking to be safe, enough of carrying expectations that were never yours to begin with. You're done performing someone else's version of worthiness. Now you show up as you are, sometimes tired, sometimes glowing, sometimes unsure, but always real. And that realness, it sets you free. You learn that honesty doesn't mean oversharing or explaining every choice. It means standing in your truth without needing to convince anyone. You speak from your center, you live in alignment, you understand that peace doesn't come from being understood by others. It comes from understanding yourself. And so, you listen more, not just to others, but to yourself, to your gut when it whispers no, to your spirit when it urges rest, to your body when it cries out for care. You no longer bulldoze over your own intuition for the sake of productivity or praise. You honor the wisdom within you as sacred. That inner wisdom, it's always been there, but now you trust it. You don't second guess every decision. You don't hand your knowing over to someone else's opinion. You stand inside yourself like a rooted tree, grounded in quiet confidence.